Firstly, on behalf of Dav and I just wanted to thank everyone for kind of taking the time out of their busy diaries to attend today. It's great to have so many of you that can make it, which is awesome. Some of you we know already, which is great to see familiar faces, and some of you are new, so it's good to connect with new people as always. A few introductions. So who is Zanda, or who are Zanda? So Zanda was formed by Dav and I just over 12 months ago, and essentially we support pre-Series A to Series D businesses to scale. Essentially supporting pre-Series A businesses with PR, funding introductions, board and portfolio hires, and then supporting post-Series A businesses, either the founder or VC or HR, in identifying top talent to scale the business globally. Why today? Why this topic? Essentially, from the webinar series we've been running, the blogs and the podcasts we've been running over the last kind of 6 months, this topic has just been top of the list. We thought that we wouldn't need to run the event because maybe times would change and that the office scenario would come back to normality. But if we looked at everybody's on this webinar today, the vast majority would be doing it from home. That wouldn't have been the case 12 months ago, and it's likely to still be the case in 6 months' time. And whilst every individual has kind of developed a routine to that, some have adjusted very well and some haven't adjusted so well. But it's even more complex when you take into consideration the organization culture, not just being an individual situation. So we're super keen to do something specifically on building the culture that can be productive and high performing. And on that topic, and on that note, having known Brett and Brett's work for a number of years, there was nobody better to kind of invite onto this webinar today. Brett's very modest, so just kind of give a quick overview. Essentially, Brett is a subject matter expert on building and developing functional high performance cultures in growth businesses. He's written for Forbes magazine on the topic, and he's written 2 books on the topic, the latest of which is to be released at the end of September. So Brett, really great to have you on. And if you could give us a quick introduction of your background, and then we'll do quick polls, and then we'll get straight into the detail, if that's okay.
Perfect, Andrew. Thanks very much for the kind invitation to join you, and also for the introduction. So a little bit about me. I ran an executive search firm for 16 years, focusing on high growth, early stage companies. And I was lucky enough to work with 3 founders in a row who had a clear understanding of their culture. And they asked me to find candidates that had the skills, experience, and values match. And this was a much harder search to do, but that's where my interest in company culture came from. And I set up Culture Gene 3 years ago. We've developed a process where we only work with 10 companies a year, and we've built a process where we define, embed, and help companies manage their culture. Looking forward to discussing remote versus hybrid with you today. And if you've got any questions, please pop them into chat, or happy to follow up afterwards.
Thanks, Brett. So if we could start with the first poll, Dav, that would be great, just to get everyone's thoughts on this topic. How's the results?
Ooh,
are they fluctuating, or is it
three-way race at the moment? But
three-way race, okay.
Still going up and down. I feel like I'm commenting on a horse racing battle. Here we are.
We should have actually put some money on before.
We should put some money on this. Yeah.
There we are. There's the results. Quite significant.
So right in the middle, really, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go with the second one. Okay, so poll 2. Wow, okay.
quicker
A
response.
bit more of a, yeah, a bit more of a majority here.
Wow.
Pretty significant. There we are.
Yeah, that is significant, and I know we'll talk on that particularly because it's the select. How do you assess someone remotely as well as you could do in person, but also then how do you onboard them and build the kind of development plan as well? So really interesting. And the last one. I think this is a really interesting one because, you know, obviously there's a lot of HR directors and chief people officers on here, and yeah, that's significant number, isn't it? Absolutely. And whilst the first poll looked middle of the ground, middle of the road with regard to how the transition was, that third question is really important in terms of how that's going to look for the next 6-12 months, which will probably give a different answer to the first poll in a few months' time. So, Brett, if we can hand over to you to share your screen and do the presentation. If anybody's got any questions at all, Dav will host a Q&A session at the end.
There we go. Can you see that?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, great. So thanks very much, everybody. Essentially, I am building some software that replicates my process. And I've been doing that for about a year. And about 8 months ago, I realized that the software was ideal for distributed teams. And so I then went and started researching these remote companies to understand what they do that's different and what they do that sets them apart. And I looked at Gitlab, Buffer, Basecamp, GitHub, Zapier, Toptal, and many others. And so this presentation is really off the back of that research that I did. When I talk about remote, when I talk to founders, I ask, are you going to go remote or hybrid? And about 70% are probably going to go hybrid and 30% are going to try remote. But actually, during this presentation, remote is hybrid. It's the same, from my perspective, it's the same thing. So when I talk about remote, I'm talking about hybrid. And I'll explain why in due course. So which one is easier to do? Hybrid is actually harder to lead. And the reason for this is when we're remote, we're all in this together. We're all experiencing the same thing pretty much. We live in different places and our houses are different, but the interaction with the company is the same. The work experience is the same. When it comes to hybrid, we can end up with an us and them situation where we've got people working in an office and people working remotely. And this is a very dangerous place to be because with hybrid, it's hard to give everybody the same work experience and it's hard to give everybody the same culture. A culture forms around the banter and the relationships and the informal comms in the office. And then another sort of multiple subcultures are forming with people who are working fully remote. And the remote people end up feeling alienated because they're not included often in decisions that are made in the office because it's human nature to just lean over and say, should we do this? Let's have a meeting about it and ignore the remote person. So remote employees also find themselves having to advocate more for their work and be more vocal. And they often feel like they're not considered in the same way as the people from HQ are considered. So the challenge here is that remote people end up feeling like second-class citizens. And this is a dangerous place to be. In order for this not to happen, a company going hybrid has to operate as a remote-first company. And the primary starting point of that is the management team have to work remote. The thing to remember here is there are thousands of newly formed, fully remote companies that will happily recruit your best and brightest if you treat them like second-class citizens. The choice is work in a company where I'm not included the way I'd like to be, or work for a company that is remote because I want to work remote. And this is a challenge that people are going through right now. And there aren't obvious or easy answers to this. So I found in my research that there are 9 best practices that remote companies focus on. And reading through these best practices, you'll think, hold on, we do well with communication. We've got good processes. Our structure's good. We're working on social connection. We've got some good documentation. In some cases, you may think we're not that good, but actually, generally, we're doing okay. But my research demonstrates that these companies go above and beyond in terms of how they focus on these 9 areas. These are almost the pillars and the best practices of what remote companies do over and above. And the main reason for that is because they do not have the advantage of an office to allow this to happen. The office environment allowed for these things to naturally occur. And they were lacking when remote companies started, or when companies transitioned to remote, so they had to go over and above to do that. I'm going to focus on these 4 during this presentation, because I've got a program that I run with companies that's a 7.5 hour workshop, and combining it down to what's manageable here so that we've got enough time to have a Q&A, I'm going to focus on 4. If anybody would like to go deeper into any of the others, process or build, enhance, demonstrate, trust, I'm happy to do that in the Q&A afterwards. So the first thing I'd like to discuss is focusing on communications. In the office, our instinct is to talk to somebody, have a meeting, coffee, listening to what people are saying. Informal communication sort of happened randomly and naturally. But in a remote or hybrid situation, we have this challenge now of, originally we are conditioned to operate synchronously, but now if we operate synchronously all the time, it's very, very hard to run a remote environment properly and a hybrid remote environment properly, because people are when they are working remotely, are putting aside time for deep focused work, or they've got to go drop their kids off at school, or they've got to look after their grandmother. So that asynchronous communication where you don't expect an immediate response is something that remote companies do extremely well, and they focus on. Working remote, it's a lot easier as a leader to accidentally withhold information or not provide enough context to your team. And I'm finding leaders are not repeating enough and are not reinforcing their communication enough already. The other thing about remote environments is information silos form, and they can create gaps in knowledge, degrade trust, and leave team members unable to do their jobs properly and waiting and waiting and waiting. When it comes to hybrid work, there is this synchronous, asynchronous challenge around an office. The people in the office are communicating in synchronicity, and they automatically expect the remote people to communicate in synchronicity. And the remote people work better balancing synchronous with asynchronous communication. So this is something that you need to look at. I'm going to go through a couple of slides here demonstrating the difference between an office communication architecture, a co-located company, and a remote-friendly or a typically remote or hybrid type of environment. So on the left-hand side here, we've got synchronous and asynchronous. And down the bottom here, we've got low permanence and high permanence. Low permanence means the communication happens and disappears or is not used again. High permanence means the communication happens and we retain it. So if we look at synchronous communication, typically it's the main form of communication in an office. It's in person, hallway conversations, team meals, one-to-ones, meetings, all hands, and so on. And this is the majority of communication that happens in an office. Phone calls can be synchronous and asynchronous because you can leave a message. Then you've got asynchronous communication, which is email. It's typically, a lot of offices, we would have used email as a staple channel for synchronous communication. But generally, email can be both. You've got collaborative documentation, knowledge bases, and wikis as your sort of company handbook. And these are the high permanence and very low usage typically in a in a normal office-based co-located environment. So that's your communication architecture typically. This is a communication architecture in a remote environment. So now we've got synchronous, we've got semi-synchronous, and we've got asynchronous. We've got low permanence and high permanence. And if we start up at the top, retreats, in-person meetings, synchronous communications happens far less often and must be planned. New channels emerge around chat to facilitate quick communication, and practices evolve where you start recording calls so that you've got proof, not proof, but you've got a record and you've got documentation of it. Most daily work now starts to happen in forums or project or task tools like Trello and GitHub, and you've got your collaborative documentation like Google Docs. The documentation becomes critical for knowledge sharing, and handbooks are significantly expanded. We see over here that email usage shrinks significantly, and some companies don't use email at all. So if we look at this, you can see how the communication architectures are radically changing from a synchronous, almost fully synchronous co-located to a synchronous, semi-synchronous, asynchronous, a remote-friendly environment. So the second best practice is remote. Remote companies processize the business. So remote companies define processes that you typically wouldn't in a co-located environment, because office-based environments don't require the same process disciplines. So I could lean across and say, Jackie, Bob, are you available? We've been talking about that subject. Meet up for a call, for a meeting at 3. I'll book an office. Are you available? Okay, great. We meet up, we have a chat, and then we send an email out if we need to. That doesn't happen in remote, because obviously we don't have the proximity and we don't have the visibility and availability. So if you think about a remote process discipline around meetings, it is, first of all, work out who you need, when they're available, and then book the meeting. Then what you need to do is you need to send out an agenda. But good remote practice is not just sending out an agenda. Good remote practice is sending out a working document agenda. And that means we are, as the host, I include who's going to be in the meeting, and we'll write out the agenda, and then we'll say, this is what I'm thinking, this is what I studied, this is the data I have, these are my concerns, these are my issues, this is what I think. And then the people invited to the meeting interact on that document before the meeting. And actually we get a lot of the reading gets done, a lot of the thinking gets done, so that at the meeting is shorter. And the meeting is often a lot simpler to deal with, because a lot of the conversation has happened prior to this. After the meeting, during the meeting, I as the host will take notes, and I would expect everybody else to take notes, and then the notes are included in the agenda and the working document, and that is shared with the meeting attendees and shared with the broader people who will be impacted by this. That document is then stored on our company manual and associated with the project. So now you can see that this becomes a disciplined process, and remote companies are incredibly detailed about these processes. This is the way we do things around here. Andreas Klinger is now a VC, but he was the head of remote for AngelList. And he said, as a remote team, you have roughly 5 times the process needs as you would in a co-located team. And there are many microprocesses that we took for granted where things can go wrong. In a bigger organization, you've got engineering processes that happen, and you may have sales processes, and they don't talk to one another properly, as an example. New joiners to a company or a team new joiner need to be able to get up to speed and understand how we do things around here in this team. So this is where the value comes in processizing the business. Structure is a big deal here, because our workday has changed dramatically for most of us, and you shouldn't expect your people to know how to work effectively from home. Some people do, but not everybody does. So if you look at a vast mobile workforce report, and this was about remote and hybrid, These are the issues: distractions, procrastination, missing things that are important that happen in the office, working longer than they're supposed to, weaker relationships, missing the camaraderie, being overlooked for promotion, not being available during core office hours, don't get much time with my line manager. So what companies do is the remote companies are very focused on structure. Because it allows your people in this high anxiety stress environment to relax about some things. So structuring your week, Mural, a remote company, they have quite a nice way of doing it with their leadership team. They ask their leadership team to think about all the types of meetings you lead and attend. And if you think about that now, is there a document that you have that defines that? So what Mural do is they have this structure on the left-hand side. When is the document? How do we do it? Sorry, when is the meeting? How do we do it? Why do we have the meeting and who's involved? And then the list of the different types of meetings the person's involved in. And this is a nice way of just, first of all, understanding your week, and then also being able to share it and people understand when they're involved, when they need it. On a company level, so the Hotjar are another fully remote team, and what they do is they had the advantage of being remote from the beginning, but they define their work week like this: Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. This is what we do. Tuesday is focus day, so limited comms unless needed. Wednesday is meeting free day. Thursday, Friday, and so on. And they specifically say people must be available between 2 and 5 p.m. CET to overlap in online availability. Obviously, if people are away and they got stuff to do, then they let their teammates know. But this is the company policy around this. The thing to think about when it comes to structure is you need, as a remote person, you need to create time for deep focused work, time for meetings. And you need to consider parents. I have 2 kids under 3, and I'm lucky to work between 9 and 12 or 2 to 5. There is a technique that I use called the Pomodoro technique, and I'll follow up with an email with some links for you to have a look at some of the documents and URLs I mentioned. But the Pomodoro technique allows you to just focus down for 20-25 minutes, 20-25 minutes, 20-25 minutes. Very effective technique once you get the hang of it. So when it comes to social connection, this is easy to do initially, but very hard to do well. And it's particularly hard, I'm finding, for companies that have been forced into remote work, or first forced into this transition, because we're used to doing social in a different way. Now, when we do social remote, it feels a little bit awkward sometimes, and people feel a little bit meh. But actually, if this thing continues for a long period of time, and if you are hybrid, you have to get this right, because the big factor that comes through time and time again with challenges for remote is loneliness. And it's really critical that you work on this and iterate on this. You need to build informal comms and social comms into the structure of the week. And ideally, I recommend you set up a committee that are responsible for this. And the committee includes people who are typically not the rah-rah types, the I want to do it, hands up, I'm all there. You need to have this diverse committee so you can include the people who are not that social. I did a survey in April this year as COVID was kicking off about what people are doing to humanize the digital experience. And I'll send a link to the survey to you. But there's a bunch of stuff, from morning check-ins, not work-related, to Friday drinks, to fitness class sessions, to movie nights using Netflix, to voice updates using Otto. People are doing lots of stuff, but this actually has to become a company-wide thing. The company has to understand that during this transition, and if we go hybrid, this is something we as a company have to get right, and you can't just step away from this. Reward and recognition is another thing that is not done as easily, or it's not as obvious in remote or hybrid environments. It's something to think about from a social point of view. People want the reward and recognition. So documentation is something that companies do incredibly well in remote because they have to. They don't have that osmosis effect that happens in office environments. So your people will need as much visibility into their colleagues' work as they would have had previously in an office environment, where they could just meet up, listen, chat, over beer. If you don't do this right, it ends up in knowledge loss and knowledge leaks, and information silos can form where trust is degraded, there's gaps in knowledge, and team members, again, are unable to do their jobs properly. The big thing here, and the big challenge, is changing from a speak first, synchronous mentality to a write first mentality. This is the big challenge. People want to pick up the phone, they want to get onto Zoom, because writing is a burden at the moment because they don't think like that. And so writing and bringing context out in the writing and almost giving training on writing, I think is a valuable exercise here. Good documentation enables a stronger, more informed, more trusting, and more connected team. The question is, how do we make sure documents that are created don't go to the document graveyard? So document done right, you do the following things. First of all, you decide which platform you're going to use. So a lot of companies use Atlassian, Jira, Confluence, etc. And if you need to, I recommend, if that's in your engineering team, I recommend you push it out across the Confluence, particularly push it out across the organization and train everybody on how to do it. So whether it's Notion or GitLab or Atlassian or whoever it is, you need a document repository. And the best document repositories are living, breathing tools that are used every day. In order to get this right, any documentation should have the following structure. There should be an owner. There should be one person who is responsible for the document. Documents should never be owned by everybody or no one in particular. There should be an audience. Is it internal? Is it internal project? Is it external customers? Is it external the whole world? There should be a cadence of updates, if any. What is the workflow for updating, and what is the lifespan? Is it going to be a 6-month project, or is this the onboarding process for the company for eternity as we improve it? And then how long has it lived? Who maintains it? And who are the owners, and who are the other people who maintain this? GitLab are sort of the granddaddies of this. They are a 1,300 remote person company. Their company manual, if you were to print it out, is 5,000 pages long. And it is a living, breathing document. I'll send you a link to Gitlab for you to have a look at it. But it is an incredibly a powerful a tool. They see it as a critical company advantage. And it's documentation is a core value in the company. You can view everything of theirs online. So I recommend that you review GitLab, Hotjar, and the other manuals that I'll send you in the email just to get an idea of what companies do well. So I shouldn't have to have this slide up, but it's something that trust is key for all businesses, as we know, but remote companies work that much harder on it. Google, I'm sure you're aware of this, Google did a 2-year research study called Project Aristotle, and they were focused on what is it about our high-performing teams that really, what is it about them? And they studied everything. They looked at all the data. And the best highest performing teams had one thing in common: psychological safety. And so remote environments really double down on psychological safety, and they make sure people are able to feel like they won't be abused. They are trusted. They won't be punished if they make a mistake. So this is something that remote companies focus on transparency, because if there's transparency, there's nothing to hide. If trust is missing, managers try to micromanage, and employees try to prove themselves by overworking. And I'm sure all of you have micromanagers in your organization. Micromanagers find it incredibly difficult to lead hybrid or remote teams because they don't have the control that they thought they had previously. And if you are a micromanager, or if your CEO is a micromanager, or if somebody else in your organization is a micromanager and they're a leader, coach them or get them a coach. It's the only way they're going to be able to move through this process and come to terms with this. focus on output. Most companies I work with are output based, so this is a little bit it's a little bit of a moot point. But actually, the point about focusing on output is understanding in a remote environment that you need to be very clear in what you communicate. It's not about the hours; it's about the output. You need to give your team the structure and trust them to manage their time, days, and responsibilities around the agreed output. Don't celebrate long working hours. Don't demonstrate you're working hard. And remember that most, if not all of your people have more time. So I don't, because I've got 2 kids under 3, but a lot of people don't have that, and they aren't doing the commute. They aren't traveling to meetings. So there is more time. Allow them the freedom of trusting them on output. When it comes to junior and experienced employees, you need to move down to a task-based evaluation of that person. Can the person do the task or not? And if they can, I have to monitor them for output. So I would say that junior employees is something that you really need to think about. If you're going to do some research onto this, there's Andy Grove came up with this idea of task relevant maturity, which is the abilities of the individual to do a task, and you can read up about that. So when we come to recruitment, what remote companies do really well is they customize the recruitment process. And it's a multi-stage disciplined approach that isn't ad hoc in any way. It's very, very focused. Bang, 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 take them through the process. A lot of companies would have done this before, but companies like Hotjar and Toptal use questionnaires and surveys up front to eliminate the wrong candidates early. So Hotjar, for example, will ask a candidate to record a video of themselves answering 5 questions. You're just using their mobile phone, and you can tell within 30 seconds, literally, whether the person fits the culture or not. So there are ways to eliminate candidates early. Another way to think about this is involve more of your team to work with the candidates, not interview the candidates, specifically for more senior roles. So what companies like Hotjar do is they design tasks with multiple interactions and multiple communication channels. So what that means is they will have a task, let's say for a product manager. This is the task. You can speak to our head of product about it. You can speak to our engineering, head of engineering. You can speak to somebody from marketing and somebody from sales. And you can speak to them as many times as you like over the next two weeks as you fulfill the task. When you speak to engineering, you can only speak to the engineering through video. You can only speak to sales through email and messaging. And you can only speak to marketing on the telephone. And so what you're evaluating is their ability to do the job, but their ability to do the job the way you do it in your company. So you hold pair programming, or you do peer work sessions with the person. And one of the critical things is to build a values-based interview question database. This is something, if you're interested, we can explore a little bit more. But essentially, the reason why this is important is because it's impossible to hire for culture fit. But you can hire for values fit. Get each person involved in the interview process to vote on the candidate and give written feedback before you get everybody together, because it may just be a flat out no, and you can save time on this. What remote companies do differently is, instead of hiring for skills, experience, and culture fit, which is impossible, they evaluate candidates based on the ability to do the job, the quality of work they do, the behavior during the process, verbal and written communication ability, and their values fit. So it's a much broader evaluation, which gives them multiple touch points to evaluate, will this person work the way we want them to work, and will they be able to fit with our company? So we don't have that gut instinct capability anymore, but we do have an ability to be broader in our interview process. It does take longer, and I find companies doing this more with senior or mid-level management and being quicker with junior candidates, but it depends. Hotjar does it with everybody, junior or senior, it doesn't matter. And they warn candidates, this is going to take longer. If you're in a hurry and you don't want to join our culture, go somewhere else. So customized onboarding is something else that these companies focus on. It starts before the new hire's first day. And the best processes I've seen all remove anxiety, build trust, and develop relationships. They do not focus on productivity. How productive can we make the person? They focus on, let's get them, let's remove their anxiety, build trust, develop relationships for them in the company so that they can be connected and get on with their job. This serves as the first post-interview encounter with your company. So if you claim to have culture X and then your onboarding is a mess, then you have culture Y, and that's the reality of it. The best ones I've seen have a communication cadence of -30, -15, -10, -2, -1 day, days. So you're communicating with a candidate, different people are communicating with you and the candidate, and then day 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 15, 30, 60, 90. One of the companies I've interviewed for my second book actually defines 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. This is what you will achieve in your first 30, 60, 90 days, 6 months and 12 months. And so there is an understanding of what's expected of the candidate, and it's discussed in the onboarding process. I'm assuming your values and your culture are defined. If they aren't, you have to. And actually what you really have to do is you have to document them. Because if your culture isn't documented, how do I learn? The osmosis is not going to happen. And so what great onboarding companies do is they really focus on it. And you can look at this in two ways. There's a cultural onboarding and there's a functional onboarding. What do we have to do for both? Most people focus on functional, and that's not enough. The last area I'd like to discuss is company culture. Remote companies have to be deliberate about culture because they don't have the luxury of an office. And what I found is most CEOs, 9 out of 10 actually, CEOs were slightly lazy about their culture because they allowed their culture to develop and be maintained by their office environment. They didn't take control of it. And so remote companies didn't have this luxury, and they had to be deliberate about their culture from the beginning, deliberate about understanding it, deliberate about defining it, deliberate about embedding it, deliberate about communicating it. If you think about it, your culture develops over time, and it develops when decisions that are made prove to be successful, and those decisions become embedded into the way we do things around here. And the way we do things around here has changed radically from December to now, and it will change again. So your culture is in more flux than it's ever been before. If you had worked on defining your culture previously, what I'm finding is the companies that had defined their culture prior to this had a very and much easier task so far of the transition to remote work than the companies that didn't. If you think about it, culture is this random combination of good and bad behaviors, habits, beliefs, assumptions, norms, principles, processes, policies, formal and informal communication, and then your values, mission, and vision. And it's this moving, ever-changing, invisible, subconscious, tangible, intangible beast of a thing. Most of it happening below the surface, and most of it happening away from you now in somebody else's home. So remote companies were really, really deliberate about focusing on this. You don't have as much control as you did. So really, as an organization, if you weren't highly focused on your culture, you're going to have to ramp that up now. If you were, you're actually going to have to go further about it. There's no office to help you build or maintain the culture. And essentially, this is directly related to the long-term morale, employee engagement, productivity, motivation, commitment, loyalty, and ultimately the success of the business. And actually, part of your culture has to be starting to think about the mental health side, the burnout side. How are we going to balance this? If you haven't documented your culture, do it now. You can mimic the elements that worked of your previous culture that you can transition across, but you've got to understand what's not going to work. And my mission in life is to help turn the culture, so the company culture development, into a critical business function in the same way that sales, marketing, and engineering are. And I believe you should treat this now as a critical business function. So the one pitch as I end is, please join the book launch. We'll send you an email about that and the dates and times. It's on the 30th of December. It's at 5 p.m. Thank you very much. Andrew, over to you.
Thanks, Brett. That was awesome. Thank you very much. Just very quickly, do you just mind just giving us a quick overview of the two books, the topics covered in both books?
Sure, thanks. So the first book is called Culture Decks Decoded. And this actually came out of the failure to finish the second book because I just hit the wall. I decided to write Culture Decks Decoded initially as a little ebook marketing tool. And what I did is I'd written a blog on the top culture decks, Netflix, Spotify, Asana, etc., LinkedIn, Valve, and so on. And this got a lot of attention. So I decided to just break it down a little bit. So I took all the culture decks out there, or most of them, and chose the best slides, and then wrote a comment either as a potential employee or as a subject matter expert. So it's a framework for creating your own culture deck. Lots of pictures, easy to read. The second one is called Own Your Culture, How to Define, Embed, and Manage Your Culture. And that's going to be published at the end of the month. I've interviewed 50 CEOs, over 50 CEOs of high growth companies with a strong functional company culture. And I've taken the exact examples of what they've done to build their culture and turn it into a framework. So you will go through values and mission and vision definition, pre-interview, interview, post-interview, how to work with, how to handle brilliant jerks, diversity and inclusion. And this is there's 5 to 8 examples of what specific companies do to execute on their culture in the book.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Dav, I'll hand over to you for Q&A if that's okay.
Yeah, great. Just a couple of points on the chat. I think you mentioned output on one of the slides in terms of what to measure. A couple of people on the chat mentioned outcomes or impact as well as potential terms that they could use.
Yeah, I think it's. Having thought about this recently, and I didn't change the slide, I actually think outcomes is better. But whether it's impact or output, as long as you define what it means to your company, because impact is a little bit fluffier than outcomes. This is the outcome we expect, and that outcome will have an impact. So it really depends on your definition of it. But it's a good point, and I actually prefer outcome, having thought about it.
Yeah, and there's another comment around, and I'm sure this is of interest to all the attendees, but mental health, obviously, as we saw earlier from the poll, a massive impact, negatively, of course. What kind of, are there any particular, techniques or platforms or engagements that companies can use, 2 or 3 things that you think could really benefit them from a mental health well-being perspective?
Yeah, so companies are being deliberate about talking about it. So they're encouraging their leaders to be honest and say, talk to your team about what are you struggling with, from the CEO down. So the CEO is literally saying, I'm really struggling with this at the moment. So be open, be honest. We are struggling, first of all, and then create safe space environments. So safe space environments can be with a team leader, it can be with other people, or it can be with a coach. So a lot of companies are having a coach made available for their people, and not a personal coach, but a let's just talk coach. How are you doing, how are you feeling, rather than let me help you in your career. So somebody who's just there to be open. There's a company name that I can't remember who do this. They actually help companies and they supply coaches and with the right degrees, et cetera, to be available. and they literally pay for that as one of the perks of the organization. I do have some notes on this that I can share with everybody as part of a document, if that would be interesting to people.
Yeah, great. Well, look, we've got a few more questions. I'm going to try and whittle through as many as I can, but the ones that we don't get through, we'll send them your way, and then you can get back to the particular attendees directly. What are the issues, some of the issues when hiring for culture fit, do you think, Brett?
So it's impossible to do. So the issues are many. But the reason why it's impossible is because if I ask, and maybe I don't want to put you guys on the spot, but maybe I should. But actually, if I ask any CEO to define their culture, they can't answer the question. They say, some people will sort of ramble around their values, but nobody can accurately define their culture. So if you can't accurately define your culture, how can you hire against it? What people are actually doing is they're hiring against gut instinct, and gut instinct is not scalable. It's personal. It's flawed. It's a feeling. You can't rely on it, and it's the reason why we make so many hiring mistakes. If you move to values, your values are consistent over time. Relatively, they can change, but they're more consistent over time. And what I do with my clients, I take them through values and expected behaviors, and then we build questions against the expected behaviors. So people like to argue with me on this, and I enjoy it. But essentially, I just
I think Brett's just cut out. Wonders of technology.
I think interestingly on the culture piece.
I think when I hear that phrase,
sorry, Brett, you just cut off for the last minute, so you may want to repeat yourself.
Oh, sorry. It's just a bit of a rant that me dies every time somebody says culture fit.
Okay, no, good point. And obviously you mentioned a number of different kind of elements that particular companies can focus on when it comes to social connection. What are the, once again, if you had to reel off a couple of things that have really worked for businesses out there to maintain contact and kind of to have individuals feel part of the kind of environment and culture, what would you say that is? I mean, there's quite a few there that you mentioned, but top of your head, 2 or 3 top ones, would you say?
There's because company culture is so diverse and random, there's nothing that consistently works for everybody, other than setting up a team and iterate and tell the whole company, we've got to work out what works here. We'll set up small communities. We'll set up a big community. We've got to work this out, and we've got to try things, because otherwise we will feel lonely. We will feel unhappy. There is a company now that escapes me the name of, but it's a Slack add-on, where you can, it randomly will invite people to have coffee together. And I find lots of people enjoy that, and that works.
It's called Donut.
Pardon?
Is it called Donut?
Donut. Yes, the Donut. That's
well done, Alicia.
I will share. I'm just looking at the questions. I will share the slide deck with everybody, and I'll follow up with some URLs that you can have a look at. So in terms of the 9 elements, one of the questions is what should we focus on? You need to look at your organization and go, where are we better or worse in these 9? And where are we able to just turn the dial up a little bit, or where are we just really terrible? And I think you've got to look at it and go, so for example, social communication is really critical. I would be working on that constantly. Documentation is one of the foundations of this. So I would get somebody to run a project and start a documentation project. And you start small, you don't expect miracles, and you just get everybody to write a critical document that's important to them, that they would own. And you collate these all in one place, and then you go from there. So it really depends on what you're good at or not, and look at it and go, okay, what's going to take longer to do? we don't want to try and you don't want to try and do all 9 at once. You can move the needle in a lot of them, and then think, okay, our culture's okay, we're doing okay. What do we change? One small thing that we start to change there. Can't boil the ocean. Try and boil the ocean with this. Do you believe that the future of work is remote? Yes and no. There's a little bit of a bubble around remote at the moment. What you're forgetting is companies Gitlab and Gitlab and Zapier hire people who enjoy remote work. Their recruitment processes are designed around this. So they would eliminate people who thought they didn't think would be good at it. And now we've got a company of people who some people just don't want to or can't. So they want to be in an office. You get people who are like that. And so I'm not sure. I think we're going to go through a period of hybrid, and because people will not leaders will not go remote first, hybrid is going to, if you hire in a half way, it will fail. And the people who want to be remote in your organization will go and join remote companies, and you will blame hybrid for it, not blame the execution of hybrid. So I think if your team can operate remote, and what a lot of remote companies do is they encourage their people to build culture outside of their home environment. It's not so easy during. I think you've got to be very disciplined.
Sorry, Brett. I think your Wi-Fi is getting a little tired. It's okay.
It's had more work than ours, to be fair.
Absolutely. And sorry, just to butt in there, Brett. Another question came through. I don't know if you can hear me. I don't know if he's totally frozen out. There we are, Brett.
Yeah, I can hear
your
you.
Head moving, so that must be a good sign. There's you kind of on one of the slides discussed how to execute on recruiting remotely, and how to do so successfully. What are the big wrongs that companies are doing at the moment when interviewing remotely? Are there any particular kind of common themes that are trending, or because obviously there's so many different styles out there, but are there any particular big no-nos that you would say don't go down that avenue, or don't do this as such?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Do I have to repeat myself?
Hand up if I cut out, and then I'll So no is not changing recruitment process. If you think you can run a recruitment process in the same way, and get the same results, then that's you really got to adapt, because you've got to find ways to work out whether this person fits with your values or not. So
sorry, Brett, you're cutting off again. Maybe Andrew could chip in with this one.
Oh, thanks for that. Yeah, thanks. Look, I think what Brett's alluding to is that you've got to, you can't just run a standard process that you would normally do in person remotely. I think there's some really interesting, I've had this conversation with Brett previously, and some of the elements in the slide deck, we didn't talk about in detail, but the element around getting more individuals within the organization to spend time with that person that's being is being interviewed, but trying to make it from an interview into a normal work situation is just massively beneficial. And it's something that I think will be a massive bonus and increase the ratio of successful hires. And I'm not sure why businesses weren't doing it as much as maybe they will do now. That nervousness and performance of the best person for the role or the best person for that organization when it's an in-person or Zoom interview can be alleviated if it's combined with a written task, an online assessment, working on a project. Some people that are the best individual for a business or an organization don't interview as well as they would be when they actually got onboarded into an organization and would add value to the the culture and the values that the business operates in. So I think you're flipping it and adding more stages and making it not an interview but more of a work project for a senior role is massively beneficial. And it's something that Brett and I talked about a few months ago, and I think it's something really interesting.
I think you took the words out of Brett's mouth there, so well done. Well, I think we're arriving toward the end of our session. So, Andrew, back over to you to round up, and then.
Thanks, Dav. Yeah, Brett, just thank you for your time. I really appreciate your insights. And what we'll do to everybody that's attended today is we'll kind of email later today or tomorrow before the weekend with all of the decks and the slides and interesting articles and elements of surveys that were discussed today. And we'll try and do a future kind of specific topic maybe on interviewing, onboarding and career development remotely, because I think that's obviously an area that's going to be important over the next 6, 12, 18 months. Sign up to Brett's book launch, and we'll see you all again soon, hopefully.
Thanks very much.
Thanks Brett.
Cheers. Thanks.
See you guys.
Take care, everyone.